the case of India, is India so close to Russia and China that we can say that the West cannot separate them from these two countries or the coalition, the SCO, and what's going on in the East? And I'm talking about Russia, China, and the kind of alternative that they're trying to make.
Um, Again, difficult to say. We know that sometimes India is shaky, and of course they are led by, as many people are, and many states are, by benefits. So, but it is obvious that on the balance right now, the benefit is actually with China and Russia. There's no doubt about it. And again, many people forget India imports a tremendous amount of Russian weaponry, and we are talking about high-end weaponry. If anybody takes a look at the India's Navy latest frigates, Talvar class, they are essentially Admiral Grigorovich class of Russian frigates. And you look at the Brahmos, and then guess what? Today's news, India wants more of S-400s. So make your own conclusion. And, they're also discussing now the issue of the Su-57s. And so that's India always was a huge, basically customer of the Soviet and Russian military-industrial complex. And I can tell you one thing. Yeah, they evidently had issues with Rafales performing properly during unlike it was the case with S-400, which Modi praised, like non-stop. So yeah, it's how to put it. And then of course, energy. We live in the civilization which requires increasingly more and more energy. The combined West cannot provide this. The only people who can provide, the only country which can provide it all is Russia. It just happened like this, So look at it. Again, the benefits are there.
Andrei, one of the points that she was trying to make, it was that we have to choose between war and peace, and cooperation and confrontation, or win-win cooperation, zero-sum game. And he's talking directly with the United States with his mentioning that. Do you think that China is still afraid of the United States doing some sort of military move toward China?
It's not afraid. It's wary. Let's put it this way. I don't think China is afraid, especially since China found its mojo, so to speak, starting from the mid 2010s. So, and of course, China has Russia, Russia has China's back. There's no doubt about it. So, but nobody wants war. Nobody wants confrontation. And you have to always keep in mind that Washington, D.C. is filled with mad nut jobs, just basically people. One of the reasons being that America doesn't know what war is. They have these whiteboard ideas about it, but nobody in the United States, nobody, zero. There are now people, including military people, who do understand what continental warfare is. They never experienced it. Not a single American serviceman lost his family, his wife, children to enemy fire. They have never had their houses burned. They just don't. They have no concept of it. All those veterans also, they killed somebody else in some kind of, remote areas. They never defended their families. They don't know what it is. They don't understand the psychological, basically setup of all that, because there is no reference point, historically, culturally, what have you. And so basically China understands it. They lost enormous amount of people, number of people during the Japanese occupation and during the war there. So China has a very good understanding of the price. America doesn't. So, and that's how the same goes for Russia, for example. Are Russians afraid of the United States? No, but they are there are all kinds of nut jobs, like that was the case with the Biden administration, who think that they are, invulnerable because they're morons. I mean, you look at the military education and most American strategists, which are near power and concentrate and congregate in the Washington D.C. Most of them are cretins, basically. They don't understand the first thing about what it entails and what other ramifications. If you go to some stupid senator, you cannot explain to Lindsey Graham that his address is known. He doesn't even understand that, what, Russians can literally launch missile which will fly into his door, because they are all fed up with the Hollywood propaganda, not understanding that technologically United States lost their arms race by a mile. It's not even, it's a knockout essentially. But they still believe all this BS, so because they are not educated people, they are primarily, what, militant humanities degree dumbed down people, economists, political scientists, people who have no clue, and as a result, you have this aggressive posture, apart from the fact that what is happening in terms of the, generally foreign policy of the United States, which is controlled by the Zionists and all kinds of people of this nature. They call it war hawks. They're chicken hawks, most of them, including American generals who would be laughed out of the, tactical level units in Russia as being incompetent. So, and that's when you have this situation. It's that, you have to tread cautiously, because if you trigger some insecure bunch in Washington, D.C., and they are extremely insecure, and narcissists like Trump, for example, who knows what they can do? Again, you have to treat the United States at this stage as a madman. And that's what Russians and Chinese do. But militarily, if the United States begins any kind of serious war, it will cease to exist. It's simple as that, and what can I say? It just has to be constantly reminded to political and military elites in the United States that they will die. Together with their families, their property, it will be parking lot, basically, if they don't understand what they're dealing with.
Andrei, you remember the head of military in Japan, US military in Japan, he said that by 2025, during the Biden administration, by 2025, they're going to have some sort of military conflict directly with China. And this was somehow reiterated by the US ambassador to NATO on Fox News.
Oh,
Here is
yeah.
what he said, Andrei.
These other countries are having to respond. And, China, I will note, I mean, most of the military equipment they demonstrated in this parade was technology most likely stolen from the United States or our allies. And, they couldn't fight the United States if they tried. We are the only world superpower with the biggest, strongest economy, and that's what we need to continue to do. We need to continue to invest in our defense, and we also need to make sure that we continue to protect the American dream and the American entrepreneur.
Are they really doing this, Andrei?
Well,
Because
Ritter is an imbecile, as you would expect from any product of the American education nowadays, and the system which the guy is a clown. And he speaks like 1984. It's the kind of it's not even double speak. It's this, set of the words which bear no significance of anything. They don't have any meaning. He repeats the tropes, it's garbage, essentially, verbal garbage, verbal diarrhea. But then again, yesterday, this moron, Jesse, whatever his name, this smug asshole, pardon my French, from Fox News, he said that, power of Siberia has to be blown up, So you cannot explain that basically everything what you have currently in American political and media elites, they are a bunch of the immoral cretins, basically. They advocate for terrorism, which they're weak. And this Whitaker guy, I don't know, it's verbal diarrhea. He spews something they're not understanding even. Take average American general, okay, from some kind or get any professor from the whatever, the general staff and command college from, Leavenworth, Kansas. They won't even pass the entrance exams for the any Russian serious military academy. They don't have basis. They're all this whiteboard, what demagogues who talk about this and that, not understanding that United States never was great military power in terms of, it always had a great, Navy, and it had impressive Air Force. But then again, it never fought real war, which it ever won. It always loses it, So, and when you talk about these people, and you talk about this military, political, whatever, them, it's cabal basically. This echo chamber. It's a death cult. They repeat all those mantras. Some of them believe it, which is pathetic, But when you look at them, country which venerates Patton as great general, there's something wrong with this army, okay, if they venerate him like that, So that means they don't know military history, they don't understand operational art and operations. And we saw it. Come on, we saw this beautiful planning of counteroffensive. It was planning by people like Donahue and Guda, those top-notch guys, those, the respectable people. And they killed more than 160,000 of personnel. They never reached even the first line of defense. But that tells you that basically they are amateurs, essentially. They operate within this bunch of the, pile, the heap of the military theories, which have nothing to do with real warfare. But you cannot explain it to them because they're arrogant. But some arrogant, others, the arrogance is being actually the adverse side of the total insecurity. Because the only thing which you can always ask those people in Pentagon, show me the money, show me the record. You lost all your wars. You cannot even freaking plan their operations or by division, let alone by the large armies. They just have no experience of that. They still grasp, this Gulf War 1.0. Really? I mean, if I tell that I just came out and kicked the ass of the 5-year-old kid in the sandbox, does it make me proud? No. So but they don't study anything, really. They really don't. Look at and we know that, for example, the academic level, or rather lack thereof, in all those military academies, especially when you look at the military academy at the West Point, I don't know, it's just unbelievable.
Why did India decide to participate? It was about the negotiations, because we had the Chinese foreign minister going to India before that. It seems that they officially made everything possible, everything, and facilitate the process of decision making on the part of the Indians. Your take on that?
India was going to participate. The question is what level of participation and what would the outcome be? Look, India and China have been working to repair relations for some time now. Last year or 2 years ago, I guess, in Kazan, Putin, brought Modi and Xi together, and there was supposed to be this promise to, repair relations. But they've got some big sticking points, and one of the biggest sticking points is border security, and such. And that's still an issue. People tend to forget that in 2020. Indian soldiers and Chinese soldiers were killing each other on that border, and there continues to be high levels of tension to this date. There's also concerns about trade, China's economic domination of the Indo-Pacific region, and concerns on the part of India that, if they don't, develop the ability to, push back against China, et cetera, and then they'll be weakened by, Chinese economic domination. There's also concerns about China's relationship with Pakistan. And, there just was a shooting war between India and Pakistan, where Chinese military support to Pakistan played a critical role. And I think India is also worried about deepening relations between Russia and China. India has always had, sort of Russia as an anchor for its, military procurement and things of that nature. And they see, closer relations. So there was a lot of impetus on the part of India to maybe put the brakes on, jumping in with 2 feet on BRICS and on the SCO, and, sort of straddle the fence and see what the West could offer. But what India found out is the West doesn't offer anything, especially the United States. The United States seeks to treat India as a colonial, colonial property, demanding that India violate, critical issues of its sovereignty when it comes to, the choices India makes, for instance, on energy security, where to source their oil and gas. And so this was the critical thing, because I don't know if Modi would have gone to China otherwise. He probably would have dispatched his foreign minister and such. But Modi went as a clear signal to the United States, to President Trump, that India is not going to be bullied by the United States, who has imposed, stiff tariffs on India, secondary sanctions, so to speak, for continuing to buy Russian energy. And I think this is a strategic shift. There's still a lot of problems, but the Indians, together with the Russians and Chinese, began a dialogue that's designed to overcome these problems and solidify the relationship now that is glued by their common objections to America's pursuit of a global hegemony based upon a rules-based international order that Russia and China divorced from a long time ago, and now looks like India is divorcing from it as well. This is very problematic for the United States. This is something that can break America's economic back, isolate America dramatically on the global stage. I'm not going to sit here and say there's no chance for America to repair relations, but I would say right now, given the very poor advice that Donald Trump's receiving from his Secretary of State, Secretary of Treasury, and others, that that doesn't appear that the Trump administration has either the desire or the tool set to that would be needed to fix relations with India. Vladimir Putin and Xi Jinping certainly do, and it looks like this is going to go down in history as one of those strategic decision points where the United States finally pushed India off the fence into the arms of China and Russia.
Isn't that amazing that Donald Trump, he says that it's too late for India to come back. So I don't know what's going on in his mind, that it's too late for India to have a better relationship with the United States. Because look at the situation between Russia and China. They're in some sort of partnership that nobody is able to separate one from another. And I don't know how long does it take for the administration in Washington to understand the reality and the nature of the relationship that India has with Russia and China. It seems to me that it's going to be, in the near future, it's going to be too late for the United States to improve that, as it happened with the case of China and Russia.
Yeah, if we apply traditional, ways of thinking to this problem set, it makes no sense. I mean, Donald Trump is literally committing geopolitical suicide as we speak, willingly so willingly that it makes one wonder whether this is deliberate or not. I mean, you and I, we start talking as if this is a big mistake on the part of the United States. But, I've just spent a lot of time scratching my head going, why would he do this? It's so blatantly obvious that it's going to lead to failure, unless failure is what he's trying to achieve. And why would I think that? I think Donald Trump, when you parse out past speeches that he's made, has talked about, America's pretty much overcommitted around the world. We've taken on the role of the world's policeman. We've, committed ourselves here, there, and everything, and we've diluted our strength. And then you look at, some of the foundational policies that he's engaged in. I believe that Trump is heading towards a fortress America. That Trump is actually trying to break free of entanglements, and in many ways to encourage, power structures to emerge that would create a balance in the world today. The rules-based international order just doesn't work. It's falling apart. It's chaos. And if the United States continues to try and, repair this, we're just going to sink. This is like trying to float the Titanic after it hit the iceberg. It's time to jump off the Titanic and get on the rescue ship and complete the voyage. And I think that it's the only thing that makes sense in my mind is that Donald Trump, is serious about creating a north-south America economic bloc dominated by the dollar, dominated by the United States, to have a weak and subservient Europe that will be linked to America, energy-wise, dollar-wise. The same with Japan and South Korea. And now what you've done is you've been able to preserve some sort of dollar dominance that that will allow the dollar to survive even after the rest of the world, the global South, dumps the dollar, which is the direction that the Russians, Chinese, and Indians are now headed. Now, this isn't something that Donald Trump can articulate publicly. First of all, there'd be a whole lot of opposition to him. And so he's using assets, and I use assets in quotation, like Marco Rubio and Secretary Scott Bessent and others, to create this, America's tough, America's, we're going to insist on this, that, and the other thing. And they're taking the lead in sanctioning and isolating the United States. And meanwhile, Donald Trump is solidifying, Fortress America. I think he's, focused on, bringing Canada, Mexico, Central and South America under his thumb. One of his strategic objectives, I believe, is to bring Venezuela under American control. That's a hell of a lot of oil. That's a lot of power. That's a lot of, long-term stability. And I think he's also looking to break China's grip on South America. I don't know, how he's going to do that, but you and I have talked about Brazil in the past, and the fact that there are significant political forces in Brazil that are opposed to Lula and BRICS and such. And I think the CIA is having a great time right now in Brazil and South America, playing CIA games, recruiting people, lining people up, undermining people to engender instability in the region so that America can appoint its, the autocrats that it likes. I don't know if this is going to succeed, but this is the direction I see the United States going. Marco Rubio leading the charge. I mean, why was he made Secretary of State? Not because he is in favor of peace with Russia, not even because he's a big Zionist. He was made Secretary of State because his big deal is Venezuela and South America. That's his thing. That's his baby. That's his bailiwick. And now he's fully engaged. We're not quitting on Greenland. We're not quitting on Canada. And Trump just made a bold pitch to the South Koreans for them to sell land to America or give land to America where the military base, so it's American soil. I don't know where that's going to go, but I can say that the economic future of South Korea and Japan, will be closely linked to the United States because we've successfully alienated them from the rest of the world. They only have one outlet to go. Europe is broken, and Europe will have no choice but to rally under American control. And this is the Fortress America that I see happening. In order to make this happen, we have to solve the Indian problem. And what I mean by that is we have to cut strings with India. I don't know if this is right. This is just this is me trying to figure out what makes sense, because nothing else makes sense. Nothing makes sense what he's doing. I mean, we are throwing India into the arms of Russia and China. Why? And I think the answer is clear. Because India, in many ways, would represent a poison pill or a potential poison pill to the Russia-China relationship, because there's just a lot of problems between India and China that aren't going to go away. This border is a big problem. And by compelling India to jump all in to this relationship, you get them to embrace India. And now they got to deal with the poison that is India. And India is pure poison. There's a lot of problems associated with India. I don't know. I don't think this is going to end up being the threesome from heaven. This is going to be the threesome from hell. And I think that's another objective here, is to create problems for Russia and China. Indirect problems. And again, the CIA's behind all this. Is classic CIA thinking and modeling. This is the only thing I can explain. I'm not going to sit here and tell you that this is solid gold and this is exactly, this is true. This is speculation, but nothing else makes any sense. Nothing makes any sense. Why would you literally cut India and encourage them to jump into the arms of Russia and China? Not because you want those three to work out. It's because India is a poison pill that you're feeding to the Russians and Chinese. And because you've created a certain geopolitical reality, China and Russia were willing to embrace India. We'll see. We'll see where it goes. The bigger story to me is Russia and China and the finalization of this massive energy deal that is literally brings it into Russia-European energy relations large scale. The gas that's being sent to China was supposed to be being sent to Europe over the course of the next decades. No, it's now going to China. Russia now has a very dedicated income stream. This is very stabilizing for the Russian economy, and it's devastating for Europe because now it guarantees that Europe's future will be buying very expensive energy from people, probably the same energy that's being pumped out of Russia right now, going down to China, and then the Chinese take it in, convert it to liquid natural gas, put it on the big ship running around the Cape up into Europe, and sell it back to the Europeans at 3-5 times the price. I don't care. Europe slit its own throat on this one. But that to me is the big story. The fact that they finally, after, China didn't want to jump. This is the stupidity of Trump, because the fact of the matter is China for a long time was hesitant about sealing this deal, and Russia was too. Russia has concerns about the Far East and China and demographics and what's going to happen as Chinese population grows and they're looking for land and they look to the Far East and there ain't no Russians in that land. There's a lot of paranoia about that. The Chinese also don't want to link themselves to Russia and be dependent upon Russian energy long term. They were looking for alternatives. They like that diversity, that energy security that comes with diversity. Nope, thanks to the United States, thanks to Donald Trump. China and Russia now have they've gone straight to, no, we're linked together now for the next 30 plus years. And that's the big story. That's the biggest story out of the SCO, I believe, is this energy relationship, because this is the one that kills Europe. And it also, and again, I just have to wonder, because Trump keeps talking about pivoting to the Pacific. You ain't going to pivot to the Pacific now, because there ain't no way you're standing up to this pairing. And I think that's deliberate, because I don't think Donald Trump's looking for a war against China. I think he's looking to disengage from China. I think he's looking to create Fortress America.
I think China is not looking for any sort of conflict, military conflict with the United States. As Xi mentioned on Victory Day, he said that humanity again has to choose between peace and war, dialogue and confrontation, win-win cooperation or zero-sum game. How did you find the parade in China? A lot of weapons they've shown, but it's not about attacking any countries. They're talking somehow, they're using this sort of representation as they're prepared to defend themselves and what they have achieved so far.
Yeah, the thing that everybody's locked on are the DF5 Cs that were paraded through. Oh my God, this is the first time we've seen the DF5C, but we've seen the DF5. It's been around a long time. It's a very big liquid fueled missile. Not very good. Not very good. We know what it is. It hangs out in tunnels and mountains, but it has to be brought out of the tunnel, then raised, and then fueled. It takes 2 hours to fuel it up. 2 hours. Satellites detect it. Time of flight of a counter-strike missile measured in, dozens of minutes. So if they ever start pulling out their DF5s and fueling them up, they're going to be destroyed. I mean, that's just, so why emphasize the DF5? Because it is clearly a weapon of deterrence. It's not a first strike weapon. It's a weapon of deterrence. The new DF5C, 12 warheads on board, big missile. But the Chinese emphasized this. They said, we have nuclear deterrence. They could have emphasized more, in a more direct fashion, their DF-41s, which are solid fuel. They're being punched out and put into silos in Western China. These are sort of like potentially first strike weapons. They could have emphasized those, but the thing everybody's focused on is DF-5s, weapon of deterrence. The parade was clearly a show of strength, but I also believe it was a show of pride. I mean, let's just be straight up honest here. You don't win wars with parade ground troops. I mean, they're good to look at. God, that's impressive. The amount of discipline and training required to do that. Those aren't combat troops, though. Those are parade ground troops. They spent all their time learning how to march like that. And if you learn how to march like that, you ain't learned how to fight. And we should keep this in mind that we saw. Now, that doesn't mean China doesn't have troops capable of fighting. I'm sure they do. I'm sure they have troops out there right now facing off against Taiwan that are fully capable of waging war. But that wasn't what was on display. There's a reason why America doesn't do this, because we have small contingents of ceremonial troops. So the Marines have the 8th and I, garrison in Washington, D.C. I think it's the 3 companies of parade-worthy Marines. Very good. They do the silent drill team. They have a band. They do really good stuff. The Army has, the regiment that guards the Tomb of the Unknown Soldiers, also a ceremonial unit. The Navy and Coast Guard and the Air Force all have ceremonial units, and they're used for funerals and for big events. But we don't have a division of parade-worthy soldiers because I can speak for the Marine Corps. We're too busy learning how to wage war. We're too busy figuring out how to kill people, not how to march and look sharp. We do that. We can march, but it's not what we do. So any military person is looking at the Chinese going, really good. I mean, same thing with the Russians on Victory Day. Impressive as hell. But what you're really looking at is you're looking for their combat soldiers and how they perform in the field. That's the true measure. And so what China did is put on one hell of a show, and they have every right to. It's the 80th anniversary of the defeat of Imperial Japan. And it's important for China and Russia and North Korea to have a parade like this because we live in a day where the West is reimagining history, where we've already seen in the 80th Victory Day celebration, Donald Trump and others trying to indicate that it wasn't the Soviet Union that defeated Nazi Germany. It was the United States, Great Britain, and France, and the Soviet Union was sort of there, but they couldn't have done it without us. We were the best in the. It's absurd. The same thing, the defeat of Japan. Yes, I mean, I come from a Marine Corps background. We cut our teeth on island hopping campaigns. I mean, Guadalcanal, Tarawa, Iwo Jima, Okinawa, Peleliu, Saipan, Guam, on and on and on. These were the battles that the Marine Corps made its reputation on. But in terms of the scope and scale of what the Russians or the Soviets were doing with the Germans, these are small ass battles, tiny little islands. Heavy fighting, bloody fighting, important to advance, our air capability, air projection capability. Iwo Jima was captured because we needed an airfield for bombers to recover from in Japan that otherwise would have been lost in the Pacific. This was a naval war in the Pacific. And even then, when it was done, the bulk of Japan's combat power had yet to be engaged. I mean, the Kwantung Army in operating in Manchuria and Korea, over 1 million men. The Japanese forces that still continued to fight in China, occupy Southeast Asia, millions of men that had yet to be engaged. And it was China that broke the back of the Japanese forces on mainland China. It was the Russians, the dramatic intervention of the Russians in August of 1945 that destroyed the Kwantung Army, broke their back. And this is what ultimately this combined with the two atomic bombs got Japan to say, okay, we're done. But the United States should have been at that ceremony. I mean, this is we should have been there. We should have been in Moscow, because we did play a role in this war, an important role, a critical role. We were one of the big allies. We were the forge of democracy. Our Lend-Lease helped keep the Soviets in the fight. We were helping the Chinese with the hump, flying equipment over the Himalayas to keep Chinese forces logistically supported. We had the Flying Tigers, Chennault's guys out there, doing air operations against the Japanese. And then, of course, there's what we did after Pearl Harbor, the huge campaign where we built this gigantic navy and we went in and conquered the Pacific. We should have been there because we did play a very important role in this victory, and we should have been there to honor the role played by the Chinese, the Russians, and the North Koreans. I mean, you got to respect your history. You got to respect the totality of history, and everything has to have a balance to it. And what Donald Trump done is disgraceful to pretend that we won the Pacific War, that there was no role played by the Chinese. The Chinese owe their freedom to us. Really, Donald? The vast majority of our support, I think almost the totality of our support, was to the nationalist Chinese, who were also fighting the communists at the same time. It was the communists that kicked the nationalists out in the end of the 1940s. So the Chinese communists don't know squat to us, except indirectly. We just have to learn our history here. We have to be respectful of history. We don't recognize the role played by the Russians, who lost hundreds of thousands of men to break the Japanese army back. What would happen if Russia hadn't come in? What had happened if Japan had withdrawn those forces to the home islands and made the United States come in and dig them out at the point of the bayonet? How many American lives would have been lost doing that? It's the same thing. We don't respect what the Soviets did in Europe, and we don't respect what the Soviets and the Chinese and the North Koreans did in the Pacific. We're singularly focused on ourselves, and we, in a way, we dishonor the sacrifice of the Americans who died fighting the Japanese and died fighting the Germans, because I don't think there's a single one of them who would want their role diminished or their role exaggerated. What they did was fantastic. What they did was heroic. What they did was essential to victory, and it should be recognized as such. But nobody wants to be given credit for something they didn't do. Nobody wants that. People want to, if you're going to get credit for what you did, and what we did was a lot. What we did was enough. What we did is help create the conditions for victory. But there's nobody that wants to have glory put upon them that belongs to others. And we should recognize, Americans don't understand what was going on in World War. We're focused on Guadalcanal. Why not? It was an important battle. But while the Battle of Guadalcanal was raging, are we aware of the major land battles being fought on mainland China, the major land battles being fought in the Southeast Asia? Some Americans have peripheral knowledge of Merrill's marauders and the war going on between the Japanese and the British along the Indian border in Burma, but not too much. We don't pay too much attention to that. We're too busy worried about these relatively small battles being fought on these islands throughout the Pacific. Are we aware of the Russian offensive that broke the back of the Japanese army? Kulkin Gol fightings and other battles that were fought. The capture of Port Arthur. The Russians lost hundreds of thousands of men in this fighting. Hundreds of thousands. This wasn't small stuff. This is large-scale ground warfare, and we're ignorant of it. We're totally ignorant of the role played by our allies in this strategic defeat of Nazi Germany and Imperial Japan.
When this sort of change comes to Washington, that the responsibility right now is you, Donald Trump, is not Joe Biden, and you are the president of the United States.
Remember, he's a second-term president. His first term was before Joe Biden, and people, need to start taking a closer look at the foreign policy of Donald Trump during this first administration and decisions that were made regarding Russia, China, India, because Donald Trump is singularly responsible for the world the way it is today. He began a process that Joe Biden inherited. Joe Biden didn't deviate from Donald Trump's foreign policy goals and objectives in a substantive fashion. The Ukraine policy was a continuation of the very aggressive, a posture that Donald Trump had taken. This concept that there wouldn't have been a war had he been president is ludicrous. There would have been a war. This war was inevitable because Donald Trump's incapable of making the compromises necessary to have prevented a war. And this war would have happened. It's just convenient for him right now to blame it all on Joe Biden. But it wasn't Joe Biden that put 20 CIA stations in Ukraine between 2017 and 2021 when Donald Trump left office. It wasn't Joe Biden that carried out very aggressive policies against China, trade war policies, policies about Taiwan that further alienated. Joe Biden simply continued these policies. It wasn't Joe Biden that alienated India. It was Donald Trump, objecting to, Russian military sales, etc. So Donald Trump lives in a never land. I mean, a fantasy land of his own construct. I think the differences between then and now is he has a world vision today that he's ready to implement aggressively. I think in his first term, he had vague concepts, but he really didn't know what he was trying to achieve and how he was trying to achieve it. But the time he had between his first term and his second term, watching Joe Biden allowed him to come up with a vision that I believe he's trying to implement today. But in order to do that, he has to distance himself from his past policies. And he does that through the convenient vehicle of Joe Biden, to blame everything on Joe Biden. But the fact of the matter is almost every problem that Donald Trump faces today is a problem that was created by Donald Trump in his first term in office.